Chapter 1. Concerning Methodology. If you aim at nothing, you will hit it every time. Zig Ziglar. The methodology I have developed, again, has 4 simple but iterative steps. Understand, plan, change, and maintain. At times, I have wondered if overly simple is good or bad, or if there are steps missed in keeping things simple. There may seem to be, but my axiom is this: keep it simple. If it is too complicated, the possibility of things that can be lost or skipped over increases. I wanted to put forth a methodology that could be used in multiple phases and industries. This process works within sales, consulting, engineering, software development, and even process-heavy DevOps models. To make sure I was not alone in my thinking in this, I performed a brief search for professional services methodology. The results were overwhelming in number, but the most important thing I discovered was I am certainly not alone in my way of thinking. Almost every graphic demonstrated an iterative process between 4 and 14 steps, usually 4 or 5 steps. Almost all had names that were similar, such as strategy, review, or planning, leading to discovery, analysis, and design, leading to verification and action plan, leading to implementation and execution, leading to quality assurance and measurement. One company I've found in my search is one I have to admit to being a little jealous of. This one is called N8 Identity. Their methodology was listed as strategize, visualize, realize, and operationalize. That is brilliantized wordplay. I applaud you. Who inspired me the most, however, is Citrix Consulting. They use a very well-known methodology of define, assess, design, deploy, monitor. You may have seen this previously as analysis, design, build/test, rollout. It is also possible you have seen the Microsoft Services Framework, which is similar. Envision, plan, build, stabilize, deploy. So, why 4 steps? And why such simplistic names? The answer is because I want to keep IT simple by keeping it simple. A methodology must be universal. The entire team, management, contractors, and everyone else, must understand why. This is the key to having everyone use the same methods. It keeps goals achievable and recognizable by everyone in the organization, from sales to the service desk to management. Everyone must understand it. Goal-oriented. Each step indicates the goal, not the effort by which the goal is achieved. It is how we think, and the method should reflect it. After all, the efforts to achieve a goal will change based on the need. Easy to remember. You should be able to quickly recall and communicate to others where you are in the process. I used to refer to change as deploy, just as I used to refer to plan as design. But then I found just having the first letter was the same was causing some confusion for me, so deploy and design being the same. Moreover, what if the task at hand didn't imply a design, but a quick change? The notion of an entire design was exhausting when only a plan was needed, so I changed the name. Doing so seriously delayed the project that you are hearing today. You'll still find me on occasion slipping old names in every now and again. But if you're new, I'm confident that these simplified descriptions for each phase will stick with you. Simply understandable. It must make sense. The words I chose reflect this. You might be looking at them and wondering why a whole book needs to be written around them. If that's the case, the first part of my mission has already been accomplished. Contrast this with the complicated terms in ITIL, Agile, or other methods, and you'll immediately understand why I wanted to create a system which doesn't require a certification or degree for everyone to implement. Everyone is invested as a result. Repeatable. The process should never be closed off. You should always present the opportunity to improve. The common saying in the open source community is you would never buy a car with the hood welded shut, so the process should be mindful of repeating itself on purpose, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. Part of your daily process. You must be able to live in this methodology on a daily basis, especially if you have multiple projects going on. I encourage project managers to include an awareness of not only where a project is in the process, but where it is going next. They can best communicate with management and project members alike the tasks needed for the day, even if they are working on multiple projects at once. Ideally, this means even your daily emails should include where you are in the steps for a particular call to action or status update. Adaptable. It must be relevant to multiple situations. If the salespeople and engineers are in line with the phase their customer is currently at with the project, they can both adapt their strategy accordingly. In my same search, I found several companies that displayed complicated methodologies on their websites. Some were so complicated I stopped reading after 2 of 14 steps because I had already lost interest, and I was searching for it specifically. If you cannot simply and effectively explain your purpose, you will lose your audience and possibly even your own focus. I wanted to use words that can describe and pertain to more than just a single project. I literally want this to be a lifestyle for the technology world. The more we can speak the same language, the more we can quickly succeed together. So, keep it simple. You don't have to use my exact words, but the key is to use something, and to use it consistently in everything you do. I researched more than 10 IT service companies, and the common threads emerged. It is those common threads on which we will focus. What I found to work in companies and in the long term are simple methodologies that everyone could understand. More steps, more complicated descriptions led to silos in adoptions of the methodology. My encouragement would be to keep it simple and just do this. Quick note for the audio listener. This is actually something that was actually very complicated, and I wanted to explain a little bit even more about why I chose these simple words. Our brains don't work in terms of complication. Our brains actually like things to be simple and laid out and easy to remember using things that it knows. It knows actions that have been taken. It knows why actions have been taken. It doesn't know complicated words for things. Nobody's impressed by that. So when it comes to the methodology, the reason it's understand is because that's our goal. We want to understand. When it comes to enacting a change, that's what we want to do, is change that. So that's why it's understand, plan, change, and maintain, because each of those are a goal. Just want to make sure that was very, very, very clear. There was bold in the text, but just wanted to make sure that comes out in the audio version. Football and methodology. In the United States, many of us are borderline, if not completely obsessed with football. Not soccer for those of you internationally listening, but follow me because this is going to be working for both sports. One particular obsession is fantasy football. Fantasy football is aptly named because it is a concept of putting a bunch of the best players you can find together on a fictional team and seeing how well the stats work out. Let us go a step further and pretend this could actually happen in real life. What if we could get the absolute best players in the game all in one super team and let them play everyone else? Now, we know these players have talent, knowledge, and the ability to perform at a peak level of what humans do. So we're going to let them play the game the way they think they should be played because, they are the experts after all. Let's put them up against a team of rookies. That team will run drills and learn plays. Above all, they will be coached in such a way that there is universal coverage of all duties by the players, more than having only the best at each position. Who do you think would win? I would put my money on the team of rookies with a good coach over the team of high-performing experts any day of the week. This is because even the most talented individuals, if not unified in a plan of action which is repeatable, predictable, and well-defined, will stumble. A team not possessing the ability for multiple members to be able to perform the tasks of others when needed will be outmatched by preparation and methodology. Egos will take the place of teamwork. This is human nature. Yet a shocking number of IT teams and consultants perform their jobs as a collection of experts, tripping over each other, arguing, often taking steps to sabotage each other simply because they don't have a system in place that lets success be measured by collective results rather than individuals not achieving. When things go wrong, there is a race to find someone to blame. When things are missed, lack of experience is blamed. At times, but quite often, it is the individual who gets fired for missing the mark, not the team. Does that sound familiar to you? Now, what if you had a team of high-performing individuals who submit to a process of coaching, discipline, and willingness to go after progress down the field instead of looking for the quote-unquote big play that would boost their stats? How do you think that team will do? I believe that they would win the Super Bowl. I grew up watching our particular U.S. football team called the Pittsburgh Steelers. Up until 2019, they had won more Super Bowls than anyone. That team, with a powerful legacy, has had only 3 coaches since 1969. Those 3 coaches have some of the most amazing winning statistics from teams who produce fairly few Pro Bowl participants. You would think that the team would be dominating either the Super Bowl or Pro Bowl every year, right? Yet, aside from obvious standout stars and stats, it is how the team performed as a whole that makes them contenders year after year, getting into the playoffs more consistently than most of their peers. I tell people all the time, the Denver Broncos weren't my team, even though I lived in Colorado, because I did not agree with the way they were coached. Their proclivity towards seeking talent over guidance as a cohesive unit shows in the sheer number of coaches they have had and the number of player trades made. My allegiance was far outside of my state simply because of how I had grown to admire a process of being more successful than individual experts. Are the Steelers perfect? Heavens no. With pride comes the occasional fall, and I have been known to go hoarse from yelling at my own team to stop making stupid mistakes and getting penalties which cost them games. Yet, I remain a proud member of Steeler Nation because it is about the team working together, more than the talent of an individual. One need only look at what was often called the Steel Curtain and some of the cohesive plays that took place during then and other eras, which provides endless entertainment and excitement. Even games that were lost still felt like wins when there were plays you end up talking about for decades. It is with that overall attitude I approach this process. I believe each of you, regardless of your level of experience, can grow into a successful career with less stress. Terms used. A few terms and the reasons why they are specifically used in this book need to be defined. Leading practices. I credit my friend Nick Rintelen from Citrix Consulting for teaching me this. Best practice is a statement that is often thrown around in information technology that really should not be in the vast majority of cases. Very rarely are you in a position to make a value judgment as to what is best in a situation. By claiming something that is a best practice, you are often unintentionally stating your recommendation is 100% true for the situation you are speaking to. Using leading practice instead of best practice gives room for the reader to understand. Even though every situation can be different, The vast majority of companies do it a certain way. That should be what people start or lead with when the question comes up. The term leading practices also limits your ability in making a bad recommendation. Scope. In every engagement, whether it is for your employer or someone for which you are consulting, it is crucial you understand the areas for which you are engaged and not engaged, what the goals are, and what needs to be avoided. This is called scope because, much like when you look through a telescope, you are looking closely at a certain item, but limiting your vision around yourself or other things. When you are reading or writing a scope, think in this way. 1. What items do I need in order for this to be successful? 2. What things would cause risk in the project? 3. What things might be asked of me while I'm in the process that would cause risk or delay my ability to complete the project? The scope is there to focus you and the people you are engaged with to ensure that you are all in agreement of what is to be done. Scope of work. Typically, a non-binding document in which two parties are working to define the areas of scope that will specifically apply to a team or team member. The scope of work is often used to determine agreed-upon statement of work documents, which define what will be done, when, and by whom. Test. Possibly the most important word an information technology professional can utter is the word test. I say this because no recommendation, design, plan, or process is perfect. The user should always be protected from unstable changes in an environment. This is done by testing or validating a change prior to it being applied into production. Quite often, an organization will need to have a dedicated mirror environment of what is in use to properly test. We will discuss testing in much greater detail in the third step, change. Production. Simply put, this is where users are interacting with live data. Production is the normal, day-to-day operation, and it should be your goal not to disrupt it. In fact, I would argue that disrupting production can be one of the most blood pressure spiking experiences a person can have. That feeling in your gut that you have done something awful is because if you have disrupted production and could have prevented it, you really did do something awful. So, protect production. Never, ever test in production if you want to be considered a professional. Stakeholders. Those who are ultimately responsible for assuring the systems are properly operational are the stakeholders in a project, who are very often IT managers, directors, vice presidents, or even the chief technology officer or chief information officer, depending on the company. People are typically designated before a project engages. Project sponsor. Often, a company needs to define who will advocate for a project, protect its budget, and assure a company's leadership that the project has merit. They may sometimes be the project stakeholders, but are very often the people in finance or a specific project team you are serving. Audience. I use this term in the book to reference the people who will be reading your documents both now and in the future. You may have an immediate audience of people in a conference room, but you may find at the end of a presentation they will ask you for the slide deck. When that happens, your audience is no longer the people in the room. Your audience becomes the people viewing the slide deck. Spoiler alert. You may never encounter those who view your document. This is the same with documentation. Your audience is who will read the document both now and perhaps years from now. Being aware of this and forming your content to match is a differentiating factor for a new professional. Success criteria. This is a mutually agreed upon set of intended results which will be used during all stages of testing to determine if a project is successful or not. Deliverable. This term usually describes a certain aspect of intended results of a project. For example, deliverables may be listed as an optimized desktop operating system image, or Design documentation. Documentation deliverables are most common, so for the sake of this book, we will mostly be referring to documents as deliverables. Layer. A document, like ones we will be targeting to produce, should separate sections to differentiate focus areas called layers. Like a cake often consists of multiple layers, so can be described of a computing environment. So let's get into this. Layers. To maintain consistency across all types of document, discussions, and presentations, it is best to standardize an approach of describing layers for each technology focus area. You should feel free to make this your own, but I'm going to describe the standard that is used more or less by Microsoft, Citrix, and VMware to describe things like end-user environments. If you run DevOps in your software development process, for example, you may need to modify these layers, and I'm sure some will not be required. Business layer. This describes the why of an overall environment. What does the environment do to support the business as a whole? What justifications exist for its current or intended configuration? For example, a Citrix Zen desktop design may contain the environment described in the business layer as being a virtual workspace in which users can work consistently from most locations and nearly any device, thus lowering operational costs in IT by standardizing a method of access, increasing security, and by keeping data inside the corporate cloud, allowing work from any location with bring-your-own-device policies, which reduce operating and capital expenses year after year. Regardless of technology, if purchasing something doesn't help the business, what is the point of buying it? User subscriber layer. This section describes the ways in which users are interacting with the system today or intend to interact with future systems. It will typically include a statement of the user's needs, a description of their methods of working, the hardware supported or intended to be supported, and the needs for identity and security management for the users. Often, any compliance need is described here. In our Citrix example, the user layer would include an overview of each grouping of users, use case, along with how many users are in each group. This overview would include, for each use case, where and when users are typically logged in, what software packages they require, what persona management is required, and any compliance needs are present per user group. The methods by which Citrix Receiver is maintained on endpoint devices is often described as an overall idea of how users maintain their systems. This is at a basic level. Much more information is typically contained here. Access layer. This section describes the methods by which users are given access to interact with the system as previously described. This will include descriptions of the current networking capabilities at client, server, WAN, LAN, all those scenarios. It will describe how subscribers, both internally and externally, will be granted access. For our Citrix example, you may describe how all users will be connecting the Citrix Receiver, or Workspace app, via HTTPS, port 443, to a NetScaler gateway, or Citrix Gateway as it's now called, to proxy the ICA traffic. Internal connections over MPLS will connect to the local access website. External users will be using a portal which requires a multi-factor authentication at the access website, e.g. access.website.com, that uses GSLB location awareness to determine which data center to authenticate against. External access is X megabit per second, which will accommodate the X user workload estimated at X kilobit per second active connection. Requirements for servers controlling access and other hardware are often outlined. Resource layer. Often referred to as the application layer in some designs, this section describes the applications themselves, whether they are located on Windows or Linux desktop, for example, or in web SaaS applications. Resources being consumed are mapped to the users or subscribers noted previously, and the needs outlined are described in terms of how many resources will be required to accommodate them. Typically, a lot of tables are used in these sections, especially for a workspace or VDI transformation project. Do not worry about the physical requirements required for the resource layer to be accommodated in this topic. This topic is merely to count the requirements that will be met in the platform layer later. This section identifies the needs and typically has a table at the end which summarizes the information. In the Zen Desktop design example, this section would include a listing of all the master images required, the virtual configuration required, the number requested, and the software to be installed to each image. Some configuration details, such as optimizations and load management, may also be described here, although this often falls into the policy category described in the control layer. Control layer. Often split into multiple parts, the control layer section describes the methods by which the user identity, security, policy, and other needs are controlled. In a Zen Desktop environment, this may include things like Active Directory structure and policies, Zen Desktop controllers, policies, persona management, SQL databases, image management, and more. As you can guess, this section will be very large, often with links and appendices detailing design decisions made for group policy and Citrix policy settings. Hypervisor and cloud connections will be outlined and mapped to resources as appropriate. A design document, the sizing and HA requirements for components will be outlined and summarized at the end. Platform layer, often called the cloud, compute, or hardware layer. Now that we know all the resources we need, where do we put them? This is where the conversation has gotten really interesting in the last few years, with the proliferation of cloud-based workloads combined with traditional data center workloads. The compute layer is where we ensure that we are meeting the CPU, memory, disk, and networking components for the access, resource, and control components. Physical and virtual cloud locations are discussed, as is the exact hardware configuration when appropriate. For example, sizing a Zen Desktop VDI environment requires thought as to how to best optimize the physical hardware and right size for the CPU and memory. If purchases have not been made, recommendations or requirements would be outlined here to best utilize the hardware. In many cases, load testing results are described here, which outline how resources will be best spread across the cloud instances. And yes, I consider cloud to simply mean a data center or someone else's computer. Security layer. Sometimes, combined into the operational layer, this section describes how user data is kept safe. Compliance such as HIPAA, PCI, SOX, etc. are discussed. Policies for anti-malware and data security are outlined. Operational layer. The key to the maintain part of the methodology is the operational layer. As a matter of fact, the only reason I don't just call it the maintain layer is because so many other industries use the operational terminology. There are both human and policy elements to keeping all this together, and the operational layer section describes the who, when, and where of the administrators and staff maintaining the environment. Service desk permissions and escalation roles are defined, disaster recovery and business continuity are discussed, update and testing procedures are listed, how the environment will be monitored and methods of proactive and reactive monitoring are described. Also of note, this list changes every now and then again as the technology changes. In fact, I made changes to this original list I made in 2017 to a newer and updated list in 2019 because of changes in cloud computing. And I almost made some additional changes recently, but I decided not to because I'd be doing edits to this book forever. Example projects. We will use several example projects in our discussions to illustrate exactly how the methodology works in each. By no means is this a definitive list. As a matter of fact, they are simply the projects I know best in my professional life. Check the methodology book blog page for more examples, found at https://it.justdothis.net/examples. Workspace transformation. Perhaps the most complex projects I have been involved with The workspace transformation, sometimes called the desktop or application virtualization, or similar names, involves taking existing or new use cases, often with existing PCs or servers, and transforming them into a virtual or cloud-based workspace. Often, the goal of such projects is to bring all the data into the data center and restrict the outbound data to replace things like VPN connections. Leadership may want to use thin clients to support bring your own device, BYOD. In that case, the workspace transformation project may involve data collection from multiple PCs, a detailed assessment, and a use case assessment. The plan phase will certainly involve lengthy design decision meetings, whiteboarding sessions, diagrams, and an examination of several associated technologies across each layer. Workspace transformation projects have very lengthy change phase, which involves the coordination of building components and validation testing, all of which typically involve a good deal of user interaction and training education. These projects quite often represent a whole new way of maintaining applications and user personas within the environment. As such, the maintain phase should be part of the planning and documentation process. What is especially unique about the workspace transformation process is that often there are sales cycles involved that should follow the same methodology. It doesn't matter if this is for an external team selling a project or an internal team selling management on dedicating resources for this project. Without a proper understand, plan, change, maintain cycle involved in these sales or converging process, it runs the risk of just being another pet project that will likely be ended midstream or not done to its full potential. Health check. This brief assessment focuses on a specific technology area to determine if a previously deployed environment is running to expectations and scores the appropriate risk areas. Health checks can sometimes be called upon when troubleshooting of a problem is not going well and management would like to rule out deviations from leading practices. The goal of a health check is to determine if additional projects, products, or even staff are needed. Successful health checks are always tactical and are rarely conducted for more than a single week. Though, labeled this on occasion, they are also not an infrastructure assessment. Infrastructure assessment. A deeper dive into specific technology with specific awareness of the business layer requirements of a deployment is called an infrastructure assessment, which promotes a combination of both strategic and tactical suggestions. The infrastructure assessment typically involves an examination of the leading practices in a multiple-layered environment because one system affects others. The infrastructure assessment process often takes between 1 to 4 weeks as a detailed analysis is performed. A peer review is a crucial step in conducting these kind of assessments, and I always recommend having a qualified and certified technology professional review your documentation before it goes to management. The documents are quite often very lengthy, often exceeding 50 pages or more. Detail is important, but guiding towards strategic and tactical suggestions is the primary goal. This type of project will often include taking remediation steps during the change phase. Windows updates. You may be surprised to see Windows updates on my list, but I feel it is always important to practice this methodology. This is just as true of a weekly event as it is with the one that occurs every 3 years. The more you take the correct procedures into account, the more you will find the work becomes easier and the risks so low, you are fairly comfortable letting others take on tasks because your system is working so well. Our scenario is going to be a common one because Microsoft releases updates on a regular basis. Patch Tuesday is a common phrase to hear around the office. The issue, if you aren't aware, is that patches to fix one issue can negatively affect others. Microsoft expects you are testing properly and therefore releases patches with a regular cadence that some refer to as public beta tests. Although the track record is actually very good, I always recommend testing, because cleaning up or recovering from a bad patch can be more expensive than the flaw it was intended to fix. So, understand the need addressed where appropriate, plan a method and time to deploy, and schedule the change. Then, monitor the results and maintain them when they are good. It is simple enough, and it follows the methodology well. Now, a side note here for the audio listener. There's another reason that I included something simple as Windows updates that you'll do very frequently. And that is that I have a saying that you will not rise to the occasion. You will only rise to your level of preparedness. Now, what this means is that when it comes to being in a crisis situation or in a unprecedented situation, we usually are not fully prepared as human beings to fully rise to that occasion. It's a romantic concept that I'm not sure where it comes from. I think it's kind of just that can-do attitude that many of us have. But the reality is, we need to be prepared, we need to be practiced in order to be successful in a stressful situation. And IT is a stressful situation. That's why I talk about things that are commonly done that sound simple. I see this time and time again, where teams are not practicing these things because they think it's too simple of a thing and they don't do anything about it. These are the ones that very often have people working in their company that don't like IT very much. They don't like IT very much because there's unpredictability of when things are broken. That unpredictability of things being broken is often and almost always caused by a lack of a good methodology. So that is why I encourage you to do this as a practice as often as possible. You will not rise to the occasion. You will only rise to your level of preparedness.